Hi guys, and Happy New Year. Welcome to this year's first episode of Sandhill Road, the show where I talk to successful startup founders and their investors about the companies that they build and invest in. And the goal, like always, is to give you a sense of what it's like to be in their shoes, how their businesses tick, to learn from their many successes and mistakes along the way, get an understanding of how they got to where they are today. And today, I'm super excited to be joined by an absolute pioneer of what we now know as the gig economy. If we think about the early companies of the modern gig economy, there are really three companies that come to mind: Airbnb, Uber, and TaskRabbit. And that's why I'm so excited to be joined by the technical co-founder of TaskRabbit, Brian Leonard, today.
Thanks for having me.
Together with Leah Busky, he built TaskRabbit from a really small niche marketplace into a huge platform used by millions of people.
TaskRabbit is an online marketplace where people can go to outsource small jobs and tasks to others in their neighborhood. So if you need dry cleaning picked up or groceries delivered, you can post the job on TaskRabbit, name the price you're willing to pay, and we have hundreds of background-checked neighborhood TaskRabbits ready to go.
The company was acquired in 2017 by IKEA, where Brian to this day leads tech. In this session, we will talk about the very early days of TaskRabbit.
Let me build the app. You're going to need an app. That's the future.
What it was like to start from this small website to scale this into a multi-million-dollar business. And we'll talk about the operational and technical challenges along the way.
So the code works, it's just the people that are the problem.
And we'll find out more about Brian himself, how this journey shaped him as a person and what he's up to today. But I would say let's hear it from Brian himself, and let's jump right in. I'm super excited to have with me here today Brian Leonard, the technical co-founder of TaskRabbit. Welcome, Brian.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Before we jump into TaskRabbit and what it was like to build and scale this company, I want to learn a little bit more about the early pre-founder, Brian. So you graduated with a degree in computer science in 2003 and then worked for 5 years at IBM, where you met your co-founder, Leah. At any point in time, if I had met you, let's say in 2003 or 2007, would I have been able to predict this great founder journey of yours? Or at what point in time did you catch the entrepreneurial bug?
I think it would have been very hard to predict at any point what we would have done. But from very early age, I always figured that I would sometime before 30, certainly before 40, be an entrepreneur of some sort. You know, I had various versions of babysitting and lawn mowing and music selling and all kinds of things in my childhood. Started culminating really when 2008 with the iPhone and the App Store and stuff like that. So even pre-TaskRabbit, I started making some apps and things like that. And when Leah had this idea, it seemed like a good one.
Yeah, so take us back to this really early days with Leah. And I remember her talking about it. You sat around the kitchen table in Boston and she told you about these 100 random strangers who she wanted to complete all kinds of tasks. So this initial supply side of this marketplace. What was that like? Were you instantly convinced that you should go and build this app, or did you call her the next day and say, well, I think we have a cozy corporate career here. Let's stick with it for a while.
Yeah, we worked together at IBM. IBM is such that everyone under a certain age knows each other. There's not that many. I remember she quit. She had this idea and she quit, and I didn't know what it was. I took her out to lunch and she told me the idea, and you know, still during that lunch, I was sort of in this iPhone phase that I was talking about, and I said, like, hey, let me build the app because you're going to need an app. That's the future. Turns out more or less true, which is good. I didn't actually build the app. We did all kinds of other things, and then eventually I built the app. The kitchen table thing, I remember, we talked about how the business model would work. Somehow you buy points or credits or something like that, and that's how it started originally. The clearest memory I have of that is the fact that I stopped by her house after picking up my wife and daughter from the airport, and my daughter was still in one of those like bucket seats, like child 3-month-old sort of thing, and she was like sitting on the table too while we were discussing this credit system, and so she's 11 years old now and in middle school, and so the company and her grew up together. I remember that.
So let's talk a little bit about scaling it up. And I've personally operated a very niche, small marketplace. And I know from that experience how hard it is to get the V1 out, to get it operational in front of people, then to get the first supply and demand side inventory in. And then once you have some traction, it becomes really intense because you get so many requests from all kinds of people, so many different profiles. And I found this quote of yours from a Crunchbase news article where you said, thinking about starting a business again, you do a business that requires less people coordination.
True enough.
Talk to us a little bit about the initial technical and operational challenges.
It's definitely true. I think mostly about this talk I used to give to engineers and product people, and it's about you're building the code, and the code mostly works. You've got this test suite, it's green, but you can't in tests when there's some erratic factor, because you want to make sure it's always green. What you do is you stub out that erratic factor. And if you pretend it's exactly this time so that daylight savings time doesn't screw you up twice a year or whatever it is. In marketplaces, the erratic factor was like the humans involved and whether they show up on time and whether they, they're supposed to clean the house every week, but then they have vacations or, they want you to move it up to Thursday. And the whole talk was that you can't stub out real life. So the code works. It's just the people that are the problem. And as a technical founder and a product leader, it's more and more learning that it's not as much about the product working or modeling that real life. It's features you build and then the flexibility you build in that it can ebb and flow as real life happens. As an example, we tried to build that scheduling weekly, bi-weekly, whatever it is, cleaning. And we end up, rebuilding Google Calendar and repeating meetings and vacation schedules. And it's just too complicated. And in the end, we ripped all that out and just said, these two people are in a relationship. It's going pretty well. Here's a button where the tasker can build a client. So chat, here's a great chat system. Show up, hit the button, end of story. And in that case, that was the right level to interface with the somewhat exhausting reality that is on the ground out there.
Let's talk a little bit about marketplace broadness versus specificity. The mothership of all marketplaces at that time was really Craigslist. And there's this great graph of Craigslist,
yes,
all the broad categories that it had, and then all the startups picking away category after category, building vertical marketplaces with specific feature sets. Interestingly enough, if you look at TaskRabbit in that graph, it's associated with general labor category in Craigslist. I read this interview with one of the ex-marketing people at TaskRabbit, Jamie Viagino, and she said, while you were a very broad platform from the very early days on, you were deliberate about building a liquid marketplace for the most popular task categories, which were handyman tasks, including IKEA assembly, house cleaning, and moving help. So when I think about these popular task categories today for handyman work, there's Thumbtack, then there was HomeJoy for the cleaning, there's Dolly now for the moving, then there are adjacent categories like dog walking, where we have the SoftBank funded WAG. My question is, there are so many categories which TaskRabbit could have evolved into. Are you sometimes wondering what TaskRabbit could have become?
Yeah, it's very interesting. We were in the same class and even neighbors with the founders of Lyft, for example. And I chatted with Logan early on and about exactly how this thing was going to work. And there was some driving happening on ours, but there was licensing and all that other stuff. And let's not do that. And he did that, and they're a public company now. It's worked out right, and we didn't super focus on delivery. It was our fifth-ish category. Let's call it DoorDash or Postmates or something like that. Is all into that from restaurants. It's also a super hard business and debatable about the profitability margins, which is one of those things we struggled with. But the thing that resonates most about what Jamie said is actually the first part. We had this hypothesis and dedication to the broadest market possible. Even now, the value still comes from the fact that you've got something in your life that's just bugging you. It's just eating away. It's a monkey on your back. It's a loop in your brain. Real value comes from an instinct that you see something. There's a shelf sitting on the ground. And like before you even are done processing all the logistics needed to make this not a problem in your life, like you've already like kind of like tapped your pocket, and you can put that in TaskRabbit. It's on its way to completion, and that has to be broad to achieve that kind of impact. The early on days was kind of Wild West in the way that the internet was beautiful in those days, and Craigslist was beautiful, which is like the weirdest things possible you could put on TaskRabbit and like they would get done. It's like a crossing the chasm kind of thing. Like the early adopters are using it and they're figuring out all the different ways you could use it. But to get into that early majority, we found that we had to e-commerceify it a little bit. And that means like you go to a homepage and it's not just an empty text box that says, well, what do you need? It's like, well, and at some point you actually have to suggest what to do to get into that early majority. And so, we took what was most popular and leaned into it. But I still see it as, pretty broad. Even household chores is like you add up like hours spent and all that. If someone did all the household chores in Europe and in the US, that's like trillions of dollars of work. And so us and IKEA, not just furniture assembly, but that whole life at home is something that is really great. Just the last thing as they pop into my mind is that it's also really great for the taskers. Some of the most inspiring stories that I have are about people that started out. I know a lady that started cleaning houses and then realized you could make a lot more money doing handy person work or electrical work, and started watching YouTube videos. And she's significantly changed her life because of essentially being able to change an hourly rate from 20-ish to 60-ish or 100-ish or whatever her rate is these days.
Related question to this, I saw some of the most grotesque tasks that were put on TaskRabbit in the early days, including removing a squirrel stuck in an attic, fitting a tuxedo to a rubber chicken, and posing as a former high school student at a high school reunion. I mean, the variety must have been huge in the beginning, right? Of what people put on there.
It's fun, right? And like, this is what reporters like to ask about. Like, what's the weirdest thing? Not we actually have more grotesque ones. I would categorize those under weird or odd. People love to ask those. It's this love-hate relationship, because we actually want to get to that general population, most of which do not have rubber chickens that need tuxedos, but all of which have a shelf or a TV sitting on the ground. Those are the stories we want to tell, but they're certainly less quirky.
So let's talk a little bit about the technical stack. And so you mentioned on Quora once that in 2008, you decided to go with Ruby on Rails because it was basically a fresh wave compared to the C and Java that you were using at IBM with Leah. Ruby at this time enabled everything to be done much faster. With respect to the current TaskRabbit stack, you revealed that it was basically AWS, Ruby, React Native, MySQL, Redis, Elasticsearch. There's some Node.js and Python in there as well. As we see a lot of software now moving to open source software frameworks, a lot of the incumbent marketplaces open sourcing some of their frameworks and libraries as well. I remember when I built my niche marketplace, we used the Airbnb calendar in our stack. If you had to build a generalizable marketplace framework today, what would be the stack you would land on?
Interesting question. It's all CTO's job to sort of always understand that and then make the decision sort of, I don't know, quarterly, maybe yearly, whether we should actually move to that or something like that to stay fresh. And so, I've thought about that before. Lots of companies start out in one language/framework and then over time, for a variety of reasons, migrate to others. And so, at least one large migration we did, which I would still recommend, in React Native, and React in general, and then React Native specifically. We had a fairly small team pre-acquisition, 12 engineers, supporting a website, a backend, and 4 apps, 2 platforms, iOS and Android, times 2 user bases, tasker and client. The leverage added by React Native only having to build those mobile apps one time, and just in general the velocity, we estimated it 5 times more productive than we were before. So I continue to recommend that, and we were one of the earliest ones on that. And I don't make these jumps lightly. That's like I jumped to Ruby, and then like no major jumps. Very like we didn't jump onto Mongo, for example. We stuck with MySQL. Like we were tried and true technology. That was the biggest jump. The biggest question is probably would I go with Rails and some of the things in that ecosystem again, or I think the choice would be with Node.js and something from that. And I think it's basically about who is involved. I still can make something faster than anything in Rails, and there's a whole set of people that are still in that spot and still are super into that, and that ecosystem is leveled off. If you look at the graph difference, it's also about the throughput. Like TaskRabbit doesn't have a major throughput problem. Everybody that's hitting our website is paying us kind of a lot of money. Mm-hmm. When you put that up against something like, I don't know, Twitter, TaskRabbit continues to make this trade-off it's about productivity and sort of pivotability and like adaptability and things like that. I think Node is a strong contender there. Newer projects that I've made, particularly that have a lot of asynchronous work, chosen Node, and so I consider that as for people out there making. One of the things I just thought about Node is sort of about there's a benefit to full stack too. JavaScript on the front and the back as your hire. I think there's a hiring advantage in the JS space as well. Thanks.
And you mentioned on Quora once that you had some problem with Elasticsearch.
When we really leaned into Elasticsearch, the problem we had, taskers needed to look at and filter quickly all the tasks available. Just that, but also geographically. Sort of like in this small window, sort of moving around in a map and then filtering by category or price or all these different sort of things like that. And so we denormalized that all in Elasticsearch and drove it from there. And we use that for recommending. So now if you go on the site and you said, I want somebody at this address, we generally serve that from Elasticsearch cache. A lot of use cases that we did in Elasticsearch, I'm not sure about the geographical one. Maybe there's PostGIS would be a good option these days. Great thing about it was that it's sort of infinitely expanded and clustered in all these things.
So let's talk a little bit about Brian Leonard after the IKEA acquisition. And I just learned that you are now in the process of starting your new company. But let's talk a little bit about this time frame after the acquisition. I mean, you were the technologist at IKEA, where everybody knew what a Billy is, but very few people have heard about refactoring, microservices, and DevOps. How was it to transition from being really on the frontier of Silicon Valley tech to moving into this Swedish IKEA furnished new home? How was this transition for you over the last few years?
Yeah, I think I've read, let's call it 100 blog posts on various acquisitions and things over the years, and 80+% of them, like, they basically don't work out. So far, so good with TaskRabbit and IKEA. And I attribute that to a couple things. One, IKEA and TaskRabbit have very aligned values. They're basically the same once you throw in sort of translational Swedish English sort of things. TaskRabbit says we're making better everyday lives for everyday people on both sides of marketplaces, and IKEA says a better life for the many people, which is very Swedish and beautiful in their own way. And those highly aligned. And better life at home is another thing that IKEA says, and they really do mean just better life at home, not selling more furniture. I can't even believe. So TaskRabbit, does plenty of IKEA assemblies, and we've optimized that a little bit as part of a partnership we did pre-acquisition. And, but then also we have a marketplace that does all kinds of other stuff. And so IKEA says, like, we want to launch TaskRabbit everywhere IKEA is, which is kind of a lot of places, 30-ish countries. And I said, okay, well, the fastest way to do that is to only launch the IKEA piece. We got new board members as part of the acquisition, and one of the Swedish guys on that says, like, but is that truly making a better life at home for the many people? Don't they have cleaning and other things to do? And I'm like, I couldn't even imagine in that moment this world where this guy is talking me down from my own mission that I've been working on for 10 years. Like he's like, you really should stick to what you want to do. And I'm like, well, this is amazing. He's pushing me to achieve something that is not directly in IKEA's like furniture revenue thing, but a general sense of creating easier lives for people. And I attribute most of the success to that. Now, IKEA is going through their own, just to get closer to your question, IKEA is going through their own transformation from a store-based, one of the things they say is in the potato fields. Like we buy land in the potato fields and we put this big blue box and then people come. It's like an event. We serve lunch and meatballs and like they buy stuff and then they go home. They're going through several different transformations right now. One, digital, more and more being sold in the app and online. In general and in their company. Another one, they're doing lots of interesting experiments in the city center. They've got stores in the center of Madrid and Paris and London. The third one is just sort of the corporate culture itself around these things that is necessary, like insourcing more things, more development. They're hiring thousands and thousands of engineers. I've had the opportunity to preach the Silicon Valley gospel a few times around agile methodologies and APIs and iterations and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, Sweden is actually in Europe. It's the country with the most unicorns. Let's move on to the last point I wanted to mention: side projects. And I always say you can tell a good entrepreneur by the number of domains he's got registered on GoDaddy. And every entrepreneur has a side project, and then the side project has another side project to it, until he stuck a chord with the market somewhere. And then I looked at your LinkedIn profile, and I saw that you had 2 side projects there. There's Wonderland Development, and then there's the Cakewalk app. How do you think about side projects, and why it is important to sort of keep your creative juices going as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, there's another class. The most common case is never launch. It's completeness thing. If you're doing something for fun, one of the challenges is if it's not fun anymore, do you keep, like that last 20% is, it's like the 80-20. It takes just as much time as the first 80%, if not more. And the other is sort of just like open source sort of things I've released over time that I've really enjoyed doing side projects. All of these, particularly sort of the 2 that you mentioned, that class, which is sort of like not exactly a startup, but certainly like a self-contained app or useful thing. For me, was always about scratching a learning itch. There's a very strong case to be made that I was able to be a better CTO because of them. Specifically, I said it's my job as a technology leader to sort of understand if there are shifts in the world of technology we should be participating in. How am I going to best understand if React Native is right for us? And somewhere in there, you have to actually try it and make an app. There's another one. It's still ongoing. Feel free to sign up, world, called Buzzback. Use buzzback.com. And it's for call boxes. So you can, these people are still, buildings built in 2019, 2020, are still getting these like phone-based call boxes where you have to hit 9 to let somebody in. And so it sort of appifies all of that, and you can create codes and whatnot. The point is, I use that as a way to explore whether React Native was good or not. And that then translated into me being quickly able to implement that at TaskRabbit. And so, one of those was about catching up in iOS development. Cakewalk app was about that. I made the app in 2010, and then, we hired people and they continued making apps, and I felt like I was behind, and so I picked a project that would allow me to catch up. And Wonderland Development was the transit apps that I made even before TaskRabbit that just kept running, over time, the money went. Eventually, didn't even pay for the $99 that Apple charges. So, and the old APIs and things like that. So I shut it down. But in general, I think it's about staying fresh and learning. If you've got that spark.
Okay, so thank you so much, Brian, for being with us. And maybe as a last point, where can people find out more about Brian and follow what you're up to next?
Let's see. I'm not particularly active, but Twitter, B Leonard. We'll put that in the notes or however that works. My new company is called Grouparoo. We're making marketing tools. One of these days, I'll get a thing where you can put your email address, and we'll get on that. The idea there, actually, like you mentioned before, like my next thing is going to be a little bit more focused, maybe B2B. We've realized that marketers sort of have a tough go in life. Particularly, they want to run a bunch of interesting campaigns, and they've got these goals they need to hit, but they don't have the data that's going to allow them to be effective at that. We've seen this in TaskRabbit. We've seen this in all the other companies that me and my co-founders have been in, and all the people we've talked to. And so, we're gonna take a run at solving that problem.
Do you have a landing page already?
Sure. Yeah, we've got a little kangaroo on there. It's called Grouparoo, and you can check that out.
Wonderful. So thank you so much, Brian, for being with us today, and I'm looking forward to following your journey.